People in Pinehaven don't talk about the schoolhouse in the woods. When James and I first arrived in town, we asked around, trying to get any information we could. Most people ignored us. A few shook their heads and walked away. One old man at a gas station mumbled something under his breath, barely loud enough to hear. "It's still in there." That was all he said before turning and leaving. James, of course, was thrilled. "This is exactly what we need," he said, grinning as he checked his camera. He had been looking for a case like this, something with real local fear behind it, something people refused to talk about. That was always a good sign. Our team consisted of 4 people. James, the lead investigator, was obsessed with proving the existence of the paranormal. Lisa, our tech specialist, managed all the cameras, audio recorders, and EMF detectors. Sam, the medium, claimed she could feel spirits the moment she stepped into a haunted location. And then there was me. Tom and I handled most of the filming and documentation. I never really believed in ghosts, but I'd seen enough strange things on our investigations to know that not everything had an explanation. We arrived at the schoolhouse just before sunset. The building was in terrible shape. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, and the windows were shattered. The walls were covered in ivy and black mold. The wooden sign above the entrance barely hung on by one nail. The words Pinehaven Elementary faded and cracked. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Lisa started setting up cameras while James went over the plan. We would gather baseline readings outside, document the area, and then move in to conduct EVP sessions. Standard procedure. But as we unpacked our gear, Sam just stood there, staring at the entrance. "Hez here," she whispered. "Who?" I asked. "The boy." The story was simple. Decades ago, a boy named Daniel went missing during school hours. His body was found days later inside a locked supply closet. No one knew how he got in there. Some believed it was an accident. Others thought something put him there. After that, students started reporting strange things. Shadows moving in empty hallways, whispers when no one was around. Teachers refused to stay late, and eventually, the school shut down. We walked through the front doors, and the air inside was thick with dust. The smell of mildew and rot clung to the walls. Broken desks and chairs were scattered across the floor. Old papers, yellowed with age, lay crumpled beneath our feet. The chalkboard still had faint writing on it, though it was too faded to read. Lisa's EMF detector beeped softly. "There's energy here," she said, adjusting the device in her hands. James pulled out his digital recorder. "If there's anyone here with us, can you give us a sign?" At first, there was silence. Then a faint noise, a soft rhythmic tapping. I turned my camera toward the sound, focusing on a small wooden desk in the corner. The tapping was coming from behind it. "Wind," James muttered. "Or an animal." Sam shook her head. "Number, it's him." The tapping stopped. Then, slowly, the desk moved. Just a few inches, but enough for all of us to see. Lisa cursed under her breath. James grinned, eyes bright with excitement. "Perfect." We moved deeper into the building. The farther we went, the colder it got. The classrooms were in terrible shape, but some still had open books on the desks, as if the students had left in a hurry. The gymnasium had a massive hole in the roof, letting in just enough light to cast strange shadows on the floor. Then we found the supply closet. The door was slightly open, its rusted handle barely hanging on. A terrible smell leaked from inside, thick and sour. James pushed the door open. Inside, there were old shelves and cleaning supplies. But that wasn't what caught our attention. Scratched into the wood of the back wall were 3 words: "Let me out." The air in the room grew colder. My breath turned visible. Then, right beside my ear, I heard a whisper, "Help me." I spun around, my heart hammering, but there was no one there. Lisa's camera glitched, the screen filling with static. She smacked the side of it, her hands shaking. "Something's messing with the equipment," she muttered. Then, in the darkness of the room, I saw movement. A small shape. A boy, standing in the shadows, watching us. His face was pale, his eyes dark and hollow. He wore a tattered school uniform, the fabric faded and torn. His lips moved, but no sound came out. James took a slow step forward. "Daniel." His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. The boy blinked. Then, in a low, rasping voice, he spoke. "Help me!" The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in a white mist. The flashlight flickered, and in that brief second of darkness, I felt something move closer. When the light returned, the boy was right in front of me. I stumbled back, my foot catching on something. Lisa gasped. James grabbed my arm, pulling me upright. The boy didn't move. His empty, soulless eyes stayed locked onto mine. "Let us out," James said, his voice firm. "Daniel, if you need help, tell us how." The boy didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his hand and pointed toward the back wall of the closet. There was nothing there, just rotting wood and the old scratches. But then, I noticed something new, a faint outline in the floor, barely visible beneath the dust. Lisa knelt and wiped the dust away with her sleeve. A rusted metal ring stuck out from the wood. "It's a hatch," she said. "But why would a supply closet have a basement?" James grabbed the ring and pulled. The wood groaned, resisting at first, but then the hatch ripped open with a loud crack. A rush of cold, damp air poured out. It smelled of earth and something rotten. A wooden ladder led down into complete darkness. My flashlight barely reached the bottom. Lisa shook her head. "No way. I'm not going down there. We don't have a choice," James said. "This is why we came. We wanted to know the truth." Sam whispered something under her breath. Her eyes were wide, unfocused. Then she turned to me, voice barely audible. "There are more." A loud crash sounded from the hallway outside. Then came footsteps. James didn't hesitate. He swung his legs over the edge of the hatch and started climbing down. I didn't want to follow him, but I knew we were out of options. One by one, we descended into the dark. The secret below. The air grew colder as I climbed down the ladder, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness below. The smell of damp earth and decay filled my nose, making my stomach turn. When my feet hit the ground, I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight revealing stone walls and a dirt floor. It wasn't just a basement. This place was old, much older than the school above it. Lisa landed beside me, her breathing shaky. James was already scanning the area with his camera. Sam was the last to descend, and as soon as she stepped onto the ground, she whispered, "They were down here." I didn't want to ask who she meant. Scattered along the walls were desks. Small, rotting wooden desks lined up in uneven rows, each with something carved into its surface. I stepped closer, brushing away the dust. The words scratched into the wood sent chills down my spine. "Let us out. We didn't do anything wrong. Please, I don't want to die." Lisa let out a small gasp. She had found something else. Bones. Small, scattered fragments peeking out from the dirt floor. Some were barely visible. Others looked as if they had been buried in a hurry. "This isn't a basement," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a grave." A scraping noise echoed through the tunnel ahead. My flashlight flickered as I turned toward the sound. Something moved at the far end of the corridor. Then, from the darkness, came a giggle. It was high-pitched, childlike, but wrong. It stretched too long, echoing unnaturally through the space. I felt Lisa grip my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "We need to go," she whispered. James took a step forward, shining his flashlight into the tunnel. "We came here for proof," he said. The whispering began, soft at first, then growing louder, too many voices speaking at once, overlapping in a frantic, desperate chorus. Then the laughing stopped, replaced by a deep, wet breathing. From the tunnel, something stepped forward. It was tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at a broken angle. Its skin was stretched too tight over its bones. Empty black holes stared where its eyes should have been. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched us. Then, it lunged. Lisa screamed, and we ran. James grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the ladder. The thing behind us moved too fast, its limbs snapping as it crawled forward. I reached the ladder first, scrambling up as fast as I could. Lisa was right behind me, sobbing as she climbed. James pushed Sam upward, glancing back just once. I will never forget the look on his face. The hatch burst open, and we tumbled into the supply closet. James slammed the door shut just as something hit it from below. The schoolhouse trembled. The walls groaned. Then silence. We ran. Through the halls, out the front doors, into the freezing night. Only when we reached the car did we dare to look back. The school stood dark and still. But as we watched, the door slowly creaked open. James turned the key in the ignition. "We're leaving." Lisa was shaking. Sam wouldn't speak. We never talked about what we saw that night. But sometimes when everything is quiet, I still hear the laughter, and I know it remembers me. The camera wasn't supposed to catch that. We were doing our usual setup shots in the Pacific Northwest, testing equipment for our Bigfoot documentary. That's when we saw it, a massive shadow moving through the trees, too fluid to be a bear, too tall to be human. I've reviewed that footage 1,000 times since then, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But what happened over the next 72 hours in those woods changed everything I thought I knew about reality. 3 of my crew members are still missing. The authorities think they just got lost, but they didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear those sounds at night. I'm sharing this footage now because people need to know the truth. The forest holds secrets, and sometimes, when you go looking for them, they come looking for you. What you're about to see is our unedited documentary footage. Some of it might be disturbing, but every second is real. I know because I lived it. We were a team of 5. Me, the director, Sarah, our wildlife expert, Mike, our cameraman, Chris, our sound guy, and Tom, our survival specialist. We'd done dozens of cryptozoology documentaries before, but this one felt different from the start. The locals we interviewed in the nearby town were genuinely scared. They wouldn't talk on camera, but off record, they told us about missing hikers, strange howls in the night, and massive footprints appearing outside their homes. We laughed it off then. Typical small-town folklore, we thought. But on our first night in the woods, the equipment started acting strange. Brand new batteries would drain in minutes. GPS signals would disappear and reappear miles away from our actual location. Sarah noticed it first. The absolute silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. By day 3, we knew something was wrong. The forest had changed around us, though none of us could explain exactly how. Our compass pointed in different directions every time we checked it. The trees seemed to close in, creating corridors that led us deeper into the woods no matter which way we turned. At night we heard it, a deep, rhythmic breathing, always just outside our camp's light. Tom said it was just the wind, but wind doesn't leave footprints. We found them every morning, massive impressions in the dirt that made our boots look like child's shoes in comparison. The smell came next, a pungent, musty odor that would appear and disappear without warning. Sarah started recording thermal readings that made no sense, spots of cold that moved against the wind, heat signatures that vanished into solid trees. Chris disappeared first. He went to check the perimeter microphones and never came back. We found his sound equipment scattered across 50 yards, the expensive gear crushed like paper. Tom wanted to call for emergency evacuation, but our satellite phone was dead and none of our backup devices worked. That night, something circled our camp for hours. We could hear its footsteps, each one making the ground tremor slightly. Mike kept filming, his hands shaking as he documented the shadows moving just beyond our firelight. The footage shows something we couldn't see with our naked eyes, a pair of massive reflective eyes watching us from the darkness. Sarah tried to analyze the height based on their position. She estimated whatever it was stood at least 9 feet tall. What happened next still haunts my nightmares. The attack came just before dawn. Our tents were ripped apart like tissue paper. I heard Mike screaming, saw the camera light swinging wildly before it went dark. Sarah pulled me into the woods, and we ran. The sounds behind us, the roars, the breaking trees, the horrible cracking noise that might have been bones, they weren't natural. We found Tom's backpack later, torn and bloody. The camera was still recording when we found it, revealing glimpses of something massive moving through the trees. Sarah said we needed to split up to survive. "It can't chase both of us," she said. That was the last time I saw her. I heard her scream 10 minutes later. I ran for 2 days straight, stumbling through the woods, barely stopping to rest. When the rescue team finally found me, I was babbling about shadows and footprints. They said I was suffering from exposure and dehydration. They didn't believe my story until they saw the footage. Even now, most of it remains classified. The official report calls it a bear attack. But bears don't strategize. Bears don't hunt methodically. Bears don't take people without leaving traces. I've spent every day since then analyzing what little footage we could salvage. There's one frame, just a split second, that shows what was hunting us. But every time I try to show it to someone, the file corrupts. Sometimes at night, I still hear that deep, rhythmic breathing outside my window, and I know, deep down, that it followed me home. I never believed in curses until the day my fingers started turning to stone. It began as a slight stiffness in my right hand, the same hand I used to pocket that seemingly harmless piece of petrified wood from Devil's Forest State Park. The rangers had warned us, of course. There were even signs everywhere screaming, "Do not remove any specimens," in bold red letters. But I was a geology professor, a man of science. I'd spent my entire career debunking supernatural nonsense. So when my wife caught me slipping that beautiful specimen into my pocket, her horrified expression just made me laugh. "It's just a rock," I told her. "These warnings are just to preserve the park." That was 3 weeks ago. Now, as I watch the gray, stone-like patches slowly creeping up my arm, those words haunt me. I've tried everything, doctors, specialists, even alternative medicine. But they all look at me with the same confused expression. The worst part? Every night since I took that cursed piece, I hear whispers in my dreams, ancient voices calling me back to the forest. They say I have to return what I stole, or the petrification won't stop until I'm nothing but another specimen in their collection. The first signs of trouble started small, so small I almost missed them. My houseplants began to wither despite regular watering, turning gray and brittle like they'd been freeze-dried. Then my cat refused to come near me, hissing whenever I entered a room. I dismissed these as coincidences, clinging to my rational mindset. But when my coffee turned to sand in my mouth during a faculty meeting, I couldn't deny something was terribly wrong. The stolen piece of petrified wood sat on my office desk, and I swear it was changing. What started as a beautiful piece of amber-colored fossil wood now looked darker, almost blood red, with patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. My colleagues started avoiding me, though they never said why. I caught glimpses of my reflection in windows and screens. My skin looked ashen, my movements stiff and unnatural. The whispers in my dreams grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of ancient forests, of time itself turning organic matter to stone, and of the price that must be paid for disturbing their eternal rest. I began to understand that I hadn't just taken a rock, I'd stolen something far more significant. The petrification spread faster with each passing day. My right arm had become completely immobile, a perfect statue of flesh turned to stone. The doctors were baffled. Their scans showed impossible results. My tissue was literally transforming into mineral deposits. But that wasn't the worst part. The curse was affecting everything around me. My wife moved out after she woke up to find her pillow had turned to sandstone where it touched my face. At work, my computer crashed whenever I tried to type, its circuits filled with crystalline formations. I could no longer deny the truth. The forest was reclaiming what I'd stolen, and it was taking more than just a piece of wood. The whispers became a constant companion, even during waking hours. They told me stories of others who had stolen from the forest, of their desperate attempts to escape their fate. Some had tried destroying their stolen pieces, others had tried giving them away. But the forest always collected its due. The voices were clear. I had only one choice: return to Devil's Forest and face what awaited me there. The drive back to Devil's Forest was a nightmare. My GPS died immediately, its screen covered in a layer of quartz. I had to navigate by memory and the pull of something ancient in my petrified bones. The stolen piece in my passenger seat seemed to pulse with an inner light, leaving tiny crystals growing on the leather seats. As I got closer to the park, the transformation accelerated. The stone had spread across my chest, making each breath a struggle. The sun was setting when I finally reached the park entrance, casting long shadows that looked like grasping fingers through the petrified trees. The gate was closed, after hours, but I didn't need it. The whispers guided me to a hidden path, one that didn't appear on any park map. My car died at the forest's edge, its engine block completely crystallized. I began my walk into the darkness, each step harder than the last as my legs slowly turned to stone. The stolen piece grew hot in my hand, burning like a coal but leaving frost patterns instead of burns. Deep in the forest, the petrified trees began to change. In the moonlight, their crystalline structures seemed to pulse with an inner light, creating patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked too long. The whispers became a chorus, echoing from every direction. I saw movement in my peripheral vision, impossible movements from trees that had been stone for millions of years. Finally, I reached a clearing I'd never seen during my previous visit. Ancient petrified trees formed a perfect circle, and in the center stood something that defied explanation. It looked like a tree, but it was actively petrifying before my eyes, the process that should take millennia happening in seconds. The voices reached a crescendo as I approached the circle's center. That's when I saw them. Dozens of human figures, all perfectly preserved in stone, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Some held small pieces of petrified wood in their crystallized hands. I recognized one face, a hiker who'd gone missing last year. The stolen piece in my hand began to burn with impossible cold as the transformation reached my neck. They gave me a choice in those final moments. The voices spoke as one now, emerging from the stone figures around me. I could join their eternal garden, become one with the ancient forest that had turned to stone eons ago, or I could take their mark and become their collector, cursed to wander the paths, warning others away and guiding those who didn't listen back to the circle. With the petrification reaching my jaw, I made my choice. That's why I'm telling you this story now. You'll see me in every petrified forest, wearing a ranger's uniform that doesn't quite look real in direct sunlight. I'll be the one reminding you to stay on the path, to take only pictures, to respect the ancient things that sleep beneath the crystalline bark. But some of you won't listen. And when you take a piece of the forest home, when you start to feel the stiffness in your fingers and hear the whispers in your dreams, I'll be waiting. After all, the forest's collection is ever growing, and someone needs to guide the new specimens home. Just remember, if you see a ranger whose shadow looks like petrified wood, you'd better check your pockets.